ones where you're like, I don't know if we should have tested that? Or were you really, I would imagine you've gotten something out of testing pretty much every channel.
Keep things within the bounds because there was never a test that we didn't learn something from when it was within those bounds. I'm much more of a believer in incremental testing and development.
Did customer feedback drive the development of new products, or were they always part of the growth plan at Quip?
I'll shout out any post-purchase survey provider because that became one of the most impactful tools that we added, both from a product development perspective, but also from a marketing perspective.
Hi, and welcome to Growth Talks, where we dive deep into the world of growth and marketing with industry leaders. I'm Christina Rubino, the General Manager of Offline or Right Side Up, and your host. Today, I'm so excited to speak with Shane Pittson, the co-founder of So&So, a venture group working to help build, grow, and run the next generation of novel consumer products and brands. He is also the former vice president of growth and marketing at Quip, a design-driven oral care company known for reshaping the way people think about oral hygiene. In this episode, we'll explore how Quip scaled from an online-only brand into brick-and-mortar retail, and how Shane approaches building hardware product companies and advising companies on how to grow their physical market share. You were at Quip in the very, very, very early days. If I'm not mistaken, you were one of, if not the first marketing hire at Quip. So I think that's where you really start to understand, like, okay, what is the brand? You're finding traction kind of as you go and setting up operations. With so many priorities in motion, how did you decide where to focus first when you joined as Quip's first employee, right?
Yeah. So initially it was operations. It was making sure that we had product in the warehouse to market and sell.
Details.
First responsibility of marketing in a roundabout way. But yeah, no, it was very much from the ground floor, so to speak. And it's difficult. It's hard to know where to start. There's so many people pitching all sorts of services. And at the time this was in 2015. So there were a lot of people beginning to see a lot of success on Facebook, and the UI is certainly not what it is today and was a lot more intimidating. And we were fortunate to be introduced to some folks that had some strong partnerships and relationships with others in the industry. And it was a lot of trial and error and a lot of working to dip our toes into new channels and reserving a certain amount of test budget to always have that experimentation going on to try and find out what else could be working. But we certainly at the very, very beginning worked with a handful of other experts to help us get started and to even know how to stand up some of the things we knew we should be doing.
Yeah. So it sounds like testing was a huge priority in terms of channel mix just to see what clicked. And that's the old like minimum viable test and all of the usual growth marketing parlance. One of the things that I love about Quip is that it takes the mission very seriously, but the brand itself has always been down to have fun. And it's like, at what point was some of that just a reflection of the personality and the people that were there? At what point are you like, oh, I guess like we should probably nail the brand voice down and like really come at it with some intent?
Yeah, that's a great question. On the brand voice side, it was certainly a reflection of the team. We were really thoughtful and we're fortunate to grow the team and find people at other innovative, interesting, fun brands to join on. We had folks from Tushy and from Thinks and from other brands that have been making waves and using advertising mediums and organic content in novel ways. And we're like, okay, how do we do that with something that's otherwise pretty boring unless you're a dentist historically in oral care? And some of the first things we got moving on were creating an email newsletter. And we're like, okay, if we can create a newsletter from a toothbrush company and toothpaste company that like people actually read and forward, then we're probably doing something right. So we put a lot of time and effort into getting that launched, which was called the Mouth Off. In terms of prioritization, we didn't really get around to that until we had some level of baseline sales and support and a paid marketing funnel up and running and established. And that was how we phased it. I think you could certainly start with more of those brand-oriented channels and tactics and just know that they're a little bit longer lead in terms of their initial return. But for us, we wanted to make sure that we had new customers coming in, and we were growing that email audience and that earned audience, so to speak, through paid efforts first. From a brand look and feel and vibe and brand identity, brand voice work, we created a lot of the ads internally for the first few years, and we kept creative really close to what we were focused focused on and oriented on. We knew that it was a big part of what unlocked scale. I think people talk about Facebook today and Meta and other platforms, and the targeting dynamics are different today than they are in the past. And a lot of folks are saying, hey, creative is the new targeting. Like, start with broad audiences and then use your creative approach to target specific audiences, and then let the platform dive in. And then I would say about a year in or so, we took what we had developed and went to an agency, which was Gin Lane at the time, and they became Pattern Brands and some really great folks on the team over there. And we worked on refining the brand voice, the positioning, some of our identity and guidelines. And we then continued to grow the team internally to live into those guidelines and express those through ads and creative and things like that, and had a lot of success that way.
Well, a brand book or brand guidelines are only as good as the use of them, right? I remember picking up our brand book and just being like, has anybody ever looked at this? And they're like, oh yeah, the guy that created it 2 years ago. I'm like, oh, that's super helpful. Like, this is like, you just love to hear it. I'm like, do the engineers use this? They're like, oh, why would they? I'm like, oh, so the idea of really investing the time, not up front, right? Because to your point, like, you're living it every day. Like, you're living the brand at that point. But at some point, you do need to formalize things into something usable that everybody can kind of, who's not quite as close to it. And then this is also where it becomes like helpful to be able to give something to third parties and agencies to be like, this is us. This is who we are. That makes a ton of sense to me. But I think in terms of like deciding what to do first, it's like, first things first, let's figure out which marketing channels to explore first. And like, at the time, like, Facebook was a non-starter. Like, of course you're going to start on Facebook, and of course you're going to scale Google and paid search. But like, what were the kinds of tests that were most valuable in the early days that came back and you were like, oh, okay, like, this is clearly the direction that we need to go into, either within those channels or other channels or whatever?
Yeah, I think one good story or an example of that was there was a close to a 6-month time period where we were spending more on Pinterest than we were on like Facebook or Instagram as standalone channels. And we were an early stage company that was very focused on customer acquisition costs and our return on ad spend, very much approaching channels from a direct response perspective. And we were able to make that work and work quite well when a lot of other folks were having difficulty with it. And I often think back to that test and what made that work well. And there were a handful of things. One was just a really supportive partnership and team. So the team that was working with D2C, DR advertisers at Pinterest at the time was incredibly strong. Another part is what I was speaking about earlier in terms of creative optimization. So we were working in close concert with the reps on targeting and campaign structure. Internally, we were working on creative and continuing to tweak and redevelop and develop creative assets for Pinterest specifically. And at the time, there was unique to Pinterest mechanic they called giraffe posts. And you could sometimes scroll almost the length of about 2.5, I want to say, like mobile screens with one post. And that was a lot of real estate. And it was interesting, but a vast majority of people were not optimizing their creative for that. So we took a really successful Facebook ad. We took this 60-second ad and we essentially broke it down frame by frame and just told the story. It did incredibly well. And so those specific nuances and kind of hacks don't exist anymore. But I think that the principles do, like working in close concert and tandem with platform partners, like they have an incentive to develop brands on their platforms. And you need to take a little bit of what they say with a grain of salt, but you're kind of working on the same team. Like, you want the ads to work and you want to grow your presence on that platform. And if you are asking them for access to betas, to alphas, and like really pushing them to help and assist by identifying what is working for other advertisers and brands, I've found that 9 times out of 10, they'll be very helpful, but it's on the brand to be proactive about that. These platforms are working with thousands of advertisers. So it's really about developing those close relationships and being prompt and responsive and showing that you're putting what they're recommending into action and like establishing establishing that rapport ensures that you continue to get that kind of inside track to testing and development on platforms. And then the creative insight is true as well. Like a lot of brands are just slow to adapt to changes in ad format and new ad formats, and just staying close to the nuances by channel and thinking through how to make the best ad for that placement, as opposed to just like giving everything carte blanche to an AI or to Performance Max or things of that nature and saying like, oh, hopefully they make good ads, can take a lot of the thought out of the ad, and that often can translate to less response.
It kind of just goes back to the whole, like, how do you keep the startup ethos as you scale? And it's like, well, if you're layering everything with like 8 people need to see this ad before it goes live, and you're getting into that where it's like, well, then now you can't, if a new ad format launches or if something changes, you can't be nimble. But it's like, you look at all of that and you're like, oh, well, some of us benefited from the fact that these channels and these technologies were nascent. And to your point, at one point, I remember being so early on Facebook that I used to tease my friends and be like, yo, I bet you that I could serve you an ad. And they're like, you mean like people like me? I'm like, nah, bro, you. I could find you and serve you an ad. And it's like, well, you can't do that anymore. But it is really interesting to think about like the inflection points for companies. And like, I didn't have on my bingo card for this interview that you'd be like, Pinterest was a really important channel for us. But it goes to show you like there are these like inflection points and moments where results from one specific channel or combination of efforts can take off. And it sounds like Pinterest was one of those channels for you guys that was kind of transformative. Do any other channels come to mind where you're like, oh, this has actually been like transformative for our business?
Yeah. There were multiple similar inflection points, and the Pinterest example was one of the earliest examples, but it certainly wasn't the most impactful. I would say the most impactful discovery on that front was the world of audio advertising. And we were doubly shocked by it because we had heard it was working well for some other advertisers. So aside from connecting with other folks, we knew enough from that it was a channel that we wanted to test, but we were really hesitant because so much of our success had been driven from these visual creations and creatives like that Pinterest test or like that Facebook ad that we created internally and that was very visual in nature. We were selling a product that was highly differentiated on its industrial design. And we were like, there's no way audio is going to be a channel that works. Like, we're going to sell a better toothbrush on audio when so much of our understanding as to why people convert is because of the look of this thing. So we did not think that it was going to be a channel that worked, but we're like, we got to give it a go. Like, other people are saying it's effective, and it's that time. Like, we've tested a lot of different digital channels, and we should begin to understand if there's room for growth in some of these offline channels that have an as large, if not larger, potential for scale. And so we got to work on the audio front. We ran a small test campaign. Folks were like, I'll give it some time. Like, it'll take 90 days or so. And our initial results and readout were, I would say, probably double the CAC target that we were looking for. So we kind of let it sit and we said, oh, like, thanks for helping us get started or get launched, but we're just going to sit with these results for a while. Well, fast forward 90 days, I'm pulling the results again and looking at the impact, and it did exactly what everyone said it would do. And we were at that point below our CAC target for the channel. So that got us really excited and created the pathway to test deeper into that channel. And eventually, that channel became our number one channel. It became, for a large period of time, the customers we acquired from the audio channel were generally a higher LTV cohort. It carried with it a lot of unexpected benefits.
Yeah. I also, full disclosure, because, people know what my day job is. I did not pay Shane to talk so fondly about audio advertising. It's a real, people are going to be like, oh, she led the witness. I actually didn't know which channel you were going to say. It doesn't surprise me, having tracked and also been part of at the very beginning, kind of what Quip's journey looked like in audio. But it is a very interesting note about audio versus visual communication. I think it's the instinct as a marketer is to be like, well, now we're asking people to have an imagination about our product. And it's like, well, yeah, that's the point. But you're also partnering with people who, like, these humans who have chosen to spend their their time consuming this medium, trust. And for an unknown consumer brand, especially something where it's like your teeth. I just remember like you grow up with like all of these notions about like how important oral care is, especially like I would say Gen X to millennials. So like to ask people to take basically a leap of faith and use this toothbrush. It's better than the one that you're using now. It's different. Like you're asking people to trust you and they've never heard of you before. So investing in those channels that have like high brand building and authenticity, it can be life changing, or it could be company changing. Just out of curiosity, this is a two-part question, but if you could go back, which channel would you have tested earlier? And on the flip side, are there any channels that you would have started later or just been like, I should have never even tested this channel? I don't know what I was thinking or what we were thinking.
Yeah, that's a great question. I certainly would have tested audio earlier, and just to underscore, yes, Christina is not, I was also not paid to say that. Yeah, no, it's audio certainly could have come sooner, but I will caveat that with saying that part of the hindsight's 2020 and the arena in the landscape of audio advertising at that time, there were no Geicos, there were no progressives advertising in audio. Ad loads were far less than they are today. And so I think it's an interesting maybe insight knowing what we know now doesn't necessarily translate one-to-one, but certainly like hands down, that would be my answer in the context of 2015 to 2018 time period.
Very good time to be a scaled advertiser in honestly all influencer. I would say pretty much. You can debate whether or not podcast is an influencer channel or whatever. I mean, YouTube, blah, 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 blah. But it's like to be on the early end of that when the economies of media and the cost basis and the way in which they were sold, et cetera. But are there any ones where you're like, I don't know if we should have tested that? Or were you really, I would imagine you've gotten something out of testing pretty much every channel, right? And I guess that's the goal.
Yeah, I would say generally we work to keep our tests in a bound that was comfortable for us. And I'd say one of the few exceptions to that rule was a large national television spot. And that was quite expensive in hindsight. I would have discouraged us moving forward with that investment at that stage. I think that a lot of folks look at large national TV. In this case, it was a like Thanksgiving Day football game. So people are at home, it's Thanksgiving. It's like the Super Bowl kind of, but it's cheaper, but also people are less engaged. And it's right in front of Black Friday and you have the holidays. So it's a great time to build awareness and then people will convert through your Facebook ads, etc. That didn't turn out to be the case. And as I matured as a marketer and looked at other points of consideration around purchase frequency and how people shop categories and having a stronger understanding between the relationship of lifts in brand awareness to conversion cycles or purchase, I have a different perspective on how to best utilize those types of tactics. But that would be where I'd focus and would be my recommendation of keep things within the bounds, because there was never a test that we didn't learn something from when it was within those bounds. It was when we tried to stretch outside of that and say we've shown that TV works well for us and we've done some big TV campaigns. So why not do one spot that's 10x what we've ever spent on a spot? And it's a big day, but you got to swing big to hit home runs. You got to swing for the fences. And I'm much more of a believer in incremental testing and development.
That's also why I'm just such a big proponent of hire and even fractionally hire people who have made, I don't even want to call them mistakes, but who have learned the relationship of those important big swings. But one of the things that talking about really big swings and thinking about some of the kind of foundational shifts in the business, expanding into retail and increasing your product offerings and expanding from e-commerce into retail in particular is a huge shift. What signals told you that it was time to make the leap as a business? And how did you guys navigate the changing of this very online identity, this brand identity, to the retail space?
Yeah, retail was another huge moment. And we thought through what our onboarding process was like through our DTC experience. And we poured over our packaging materials. We understood that our packaging was simultaneously a billboard. It was also our welcome series. It was also an ad, a DR ad on the back of the pack. It was the full marketing funnel, in a little box. And how do we take an ever expanding Figma file and set of drips and some of the luxuries of e-commerce and fit them into a physical experience? So we focused a lot on that, on different onboarding materials, on different incentives to create a relationship with us as a brand. We differentiated ourselves on our customer support and experience, and going into mass retail can create an environment where it's harder for customers to get a hold of you as the brand or manufacturer. And so we spent a lot of time thinking through, how do we bridge that gap? How do we make that as easy as possible to continue to differentiate ourselves with the other people that are on those shelves and the other brands that are on those shelves? And that's been a space I ended up spending not only a lot of time at launch, but we kept thinking about that question. That was such a core question for us, was how do we best support customers after they've purchased through a retailer? And we experimented with a lot of different things. And the tough part about physical retail, as well as the experimentation cycles, are just longer. Like, you have to cycle through inventory, you have to print stuff and make sure that it gets incorporated into packaging, which then goes to a warehouse. At first it goes on a ship for 90 days, and then it goes to a warehouse, and then it goes to the retailer, and then it goes to local distribution centers, and then to stores, and then maybe the store manager puts it on the aisle. It's fractured in a lot of ways. And so you have to be really intentional and really thoughtful about how you construct tests, and really push yourselves internally to ensure that the marketing team is in sync with the operations team to know when those key moments are. So if there's a moment where you're about to order a bunch more inventory, you have that moment to say, okay, are there any changes we want to make now, or anything else we want to test before we place this giant order? I had been speaking with the founder at Helper for years before they had launched, looking at that problem space of like, how do we make the post-purchase experience as easy as possible for customers at retail, and how do we make that as helpful as possible as it is when you're buying things online? And they have been using NFC technology and like tap to touch technology and bringing it to like all sorts of products, and it's so delightful. I think one of the most delightful things about Apple products is like, it tells you to unbox it, and then as soon as you open it, this cool experience like shows up on your phone, and it almost feels like you opened up like a treasure chest or something. Like, X marks the spot. Like, I found it.
Hello.
Yeah, it's like, hello, nice to meet you. Thank you for spending hundreds of dollars on, headphones or like whatever.
Oh, if they made a candle that smelled like the inside of a new Apple device, I would be all over it. It's just like, it's a great experience.
Totally. And so everyone's like so delighted by that. And yet that type of experience hasn't made it to so many other products. So
it's funny because my follow-up question was going to be, how do you navigate customer retention? And you answered it, because it's the first question that comes to mind, right? It's like, well, these are not going to be as sticky as the people that I have direct access to. Like, you have no idea how these people are going to go through your funnel and your flow. And it's just, part of it is like, even triangulating is hard because it's tactile. It's not like you can track these people and how they are engaging with your shelf space and your retail presence, your packaging, just everything. And actually thinking about like feedback loop, actually, to your point about it, like, it takes a long time. Did customer feedback drive the development of new products, or were they always part of the growth plan at Quip?
I'll shout out any post-purchase survey provider, because that became one of the most impactful tools that we added, both from a product development perspective, but also from a marketing perspective. Our post-purchase survey response rate was around 80%, which was super high for a voluntary, survey post-purchase. And we did quite a bit of tinkering to get it there, but we found that to be an incredibly helpful resource as we scaled. It was our most helpful and accurate attribution partner, and it was an extremely quick and adaptive research partner. So we would swap in different questions of like what flavor profiles people were interested in, and what types of products people were interested in, what types of services people would be open to us launching or would trust us as a brand like entering into. And we could get thousands of responses in a day. It was amazing for free. So I highly recommend leveraging post-purchase surveys for both product insights and and marketing analytics, and getting that set up early because it's just such a useful and helpful foundation.
No, I was going to say, I promise I'm not making you play my hits, because I also am always talking about the benefits of a post-purchase survey, not just for marketing attribution, but like literally for so many things. And it's so resilient in terms of what you can use it for, and that the data stands up and that you're allowed to ask it and keep it and use it. And yeah, I'm a big +1 on that.
Yeah. And every once in a while, I hear someone say like, oh, can you really trust the results? Like, we're just trying to get through it. And like, they're just answering whatever to get to the next place. And I think people are a lot more honest and just forthright with feedback when you make it simple. So like, don't overcomplicate it. I think if you overcomplicate it, sure. But if you throw softballs, people aren't going to like totally frustrate the situation for the heck of it. They're going to be like, oh, an easy question to answer. So I think if you don't overcomplicate it, like the data integrity was never something that we ran into as an issue.
I am straight up shook, because like, if you think about it, like I've never correlated like BuzzFeed quizzes basically in my brain to like, why do people like answering questions online? And it's like, well, duh, Christina, because we all were like, which Friends character are you?
We've all been sorted by the BuzzFeed sorting hat. Yeah.
Gryffindor or Slytherin or, you know, whatever, Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw. Big time nerd. Being mindful, we do a couple of little things here. We do a silly little test called the A/B test. And it's like a little feature / break, usually in the middle of an episode. But we were having so much fun talking about like actual work related stuff. But I'm going to, you know, marketers love an A/B test. So I'm going to ask you a few questions that are work related and a few that are not, and just ask you to pick your poison. And it can be very scientific or not at all. Okay, so online D2C or brick and mortar retail?
Wow. With the hard questions, brick and mortar retail.
Ooh, okay.
It's defensible. It's hard. It's harder, and it's also larger.
Defensible.
Also, I love walking around the Target store with popcorn, and I also like walking around the grocery store and just going aisle by aisle and asking myself, do I need this? The answer is all too often yes, but
yeah, but like, this is also why my husband and I don't go grocery shopping anymore, because I grocery shop based on vibes. And he's like, I have the list. I'm going to nail the list. And then I'm going to leave the store. And I'm like, but look at the shiny things. Like, you can't go to Trader Joe's with a list. That's not how any of this works. Ooh, okay. Croissant or Danish?
croissant.
Okay. I mean, there's not a right answer.
Croissant.
Croissant.
A little like a good flaky croissant.
Oh, yeah.
We want some serious air pockets in there and a nice flaky laminate.
Traveling to a place that you love or traveling somewhere new?
Traveling somewhere new. I think discovery is fantastic. I think travel and being exposed to new and different cultures is an honor. It's a privilege, but it's also so eye-opening and creates so much connection, understanding. Yeah, opting for new spaces, new people, new environments, new perspectives.
Direct mail or television?
That's a really tough one. I'm going to say direct mail because they stick to their roots, and I love a postcard. I love restaurants that give out postcards. I carry stamps in my wallet to just be ready to send those postcards. But TV, I think, has too much of an identity crisis. Is it connected TV? Is it on your phone? Is it like, where's the inventory at? We don't know. And I think they're still figuring that out too.
Yeah. I'm waiting for the time when we all just give up on distinctions and it's audio, video, and display. I have been saying that for the better part of the last 10 years. And I am just waiting for the day that the market comes around to me and realizes that like online versus linear versus broadcast versus. It's how we consume content. It just is. And you could put in written word into display and spoken word into audio. You know what I mean? So I have that's my nerdy contribution to this. Sweet or savory?
Sweet. I have a sweet tooth.
Well, then my next question, actually, I'm going to ask brushing or flossing?
Brushing, but I will say that technically the answer should be flossing. Flossing is more important. I do love the Quip water flosser is fantastic. The Cocoa Floss team and product is fantastic. I love using Cocoa Floss. There are a lot of great products in flossing, but flossing is just tough. It's just a little more brushing. You can kind of like zone out. I feel like I had brushing thoughts. Flossing, you're a little more tuned in. It's like brush, you can kind of just brush and kind of have those like shower thoughts vibes.
That concludes our A/B test. What you're doing now, you've started and are are working at So&So, where you're now helping brands navigate hardware development and marketing. And I love that you're taking all of the knowledge that you've gleaned over probably many late nights and many start, stops, and continues in your time at Quip. What are the most common blind spots that you're seeing founders face, whether it's like in production, in marketing, or in scaling physical products?
Yeah, I think there's a few blind spots. I think a lot of early stage founders just have difficulty in understanding where to invest dollars. Like the capital markets are tight right now. And I would say it's always been hard to be a hardware founder in general. Like it's not an arena that attracts a lot of straightforward early stage investment. And so it's as important as ever to really ensure that you're making the right investments, that you're prioritizing the right tests. And the more that you can de-risk that, the more that you can work with folks that can help you avoid the shoals and waves and typhoons of getting to market, and that can chart a clear course, the better it's going to be. That type of partnership is well worth it. And yeah, I see that across a lot of founders, is just being unsure about the right service vendors to work with, the right investments to make in brand. I know earlier we were talking about brand guidelines and helping folks understand, like, look, nail this part of your funnel, really start to establish something that is working for you and is on autopilot or on repeat, then begin to expand. Don't try to boil the ocean. I see that a lot too, of like, this brand has so much potential, and it often does, but you want to be really thoughtful and methodical about how you approach product development. Everything requires investment, product development included. So you're often better off focusing on really landing a product that has strong product market fit, growing that, and then expanding from there. I also see the reverse of folks that kind of get really stuck in just one funnel and one product. And they're like, oh, this product is great, super strong product market fit. We're going to grow this to 400 million top line. And things start to slow down. The CACs that they were seeing on Meta, on other advertising channels, start to creep up. And then they start to scramble for growth through other means. And they're a little late to the punch. They have a 2-year product development cycle ahead of them to grow through product launches or development. And so really understanding where those saturation curves are, where things start to slow down, and how to phase out an innovation roadmap to support holistic brand growth is something I see a lot of early stage founders struggle with.
Is that what makes you the most excited about the work that you're doing now, and the work that I would imagine you're working really closely with founders, with other founders. And what's making you like the most excited or challenged, or like, what are you just like, oh man, I'm so happy I'm doing this right now because I can do A, B, or C?
I love that I can leverage a lot of past experiences and insights to accelerate things in a way that, I know one of your questions earlier was like, oh, what would you have done sooner? And like, there are many responses to that question, and having those ready to go and being able to apply those across different categories is really fun. It's rewarding just being at that early stage. Like, yeah, there's a lot of unknowns, but there's a lot of really cool innovation. There's a lot of really cool products that have not yet made it to market, in some cases because capital is tight, and it's difficult to attract talent to help some founders actually get those products to market. So I've always been really attracted to the entrepreneurial space and the innovation space. And there are a lot of folks that have interesting technology, interesting developments that have a consumer hardware component. And that's just a really tough thing to get to market, or to bring to market from a capital perspective, from a team perspective, and then ensuring you're like avoiding some of the pitfalls that can be really expensive. It's like a little bit like hopscotch or something. It's like, I've done this hopscotch course multiple times. Like, here's how to do it. Like, and you just, you're not going to have to start over again.
Yeah. I like to think that's why I enjoy consulting so much. One of my phrases that a friend here used the other day, and that I was just like, yep, that's it. We see this all the time. And it can be just so reassuring when somebody's like, oh, no, we see this all the time. Like, you're not the first person to uncover this thing in a corner that's like kind of weird and you don't know how to navigate it. Or it's like the old parable of like, friends are there to help you go through something that they've been through before. Like it kind of translating that to business. There's something beautiful about that. Okay, 2 more very quick questions. One is, what physical product are you dying for somebody to either develop or reinvent?
Ooh, great question. Gosh, I'm trying to think through some of my pain points. I feel like we're doing this all day, and so we've identified a whole bunch of things that we want to work on.
Okay, but wait, that makes me so so excited to see what you're working on next. Now I'm just going to be like, Shane, what are you making that I can't live without? / that I'm going to show my husband and be like, hey babe, look at this thing I found at Target. Isn't it cool? He's going to be like, what? That wasn't on the list, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we love stuff at that intersection of like, what's going to be a surprise purchase at a retailer.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I knew I wanted to get into advertising when I was 16, like a crazy person, like marketing and advertising. And I was just like, you mean that I can tell people about stuff that they don't know that they need or want and make them want to buy it? That's so cool. I'm a nerd. But my last question for you, this is a question that I ask everybody kind of at the conclusion of our interview, but we hear the term growth hack all the time in our business. And what I want to know is, what is your favorite growth non-hack?
Is interesting. The growth unhack, the growth non-hack, if you will.
Listen, not all of us are going to be working in podcast advertising in 2015 or Meta in 2012. So the opportunities for hacking are, I would say, few and far between at this point. So there's got to be another way.
Totally. Yeah, so much of it is methodical. I think the growth unhack that is maybe not my favorite, but is one that I've spent a lot of time working on and thinking through and coaching people through, both from an executive team perspective, an investor perspective, an operational partner perspective, is the relationship between brand advertising and direct response advertising, how to structure media budgets accordingly, and how to manage expectations surrounding media investments. It's not the shiny side of growth, but it's when you go back to some of the marketing principles, it's really rewarding, because when you start to really dive into that, you start to say, okay, well, what are we building? Are we building something that sells more widgets tomorrow, or are we building a brand that people will love in 10 years, in 20 years? And why do people love our brand? Like, what makes us different? Like, going through that type of exercise opens up a lot of, I would say, marketing 101 type questions I think people don't ask often enough. However, I'll caveat that with, there's a lot of opportunity for science and data analytics and apply it in ways that a lot of marketers before didn't have access to. And being able to think through interesting, like, match market testing and geographic holdout testing, not only to measure direct response, but to think through lifts in brand awareness, and then to think about your particular category's purchase frequency, and to go back to some of those post-purchase survey results and even customer census results, and to think about the media diet of your customer, not necessarily of a panel from one of the legacy providers, et cetera, or to then supercharge that with a panel from one of those providers. We're so excited about entering this space. Is such a great reminder, and is a long process and a hard process. I'm here to chat with anybody about that. Like, I've been a sounding board to many on that front, and many have been a sounding board to me on that front. Those questions can sometimes provoke like really hostile environments between operators and their executive teams and their investors, and vice versa. And so it's always helpful to have friends and have additional perspective and like that kind of marketing therapy. But that is one giant arena that I wasn't expecting to go that direction. But that is one whole kind of marketing ungrowth, or like growth unhack, that is very difficult, but very rewarding at the same time.
I think that is a perfect place to leave it in for today. Shane, thank you for giving so much of your time and your insights and your experience. I am so excited for us to publish this one. This is a great one. Thank you again for joining me.
Yeah, such a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Growth Talks. We hope you found our discussion insightful and fun. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more valuable content. And if you're excited and ready to start up-leveling your growth strategies and execution, Right Side Up has you covered. Right Side Up is a leading growth marketing agency that has partnered with over 1,000 companies of all stages and sizes to help them meet and exceed their growth goals. With expertise across all growth marketing functions, we can help you evaluate product market fit, develop customer acquisition strategies, navigate executional challenges and staffing gaps, and make pivotal decisions with confidence. And whether you need one individual or a custom-built, full-service team, we'll find you the right A+ talent. Visit us at rightsideup.com to see how we can help you and your company grow.